FDTCT Flash Dynamic Triade Color Test by Corrado Malanga, December 31, 2012. This article describes the final procedure that allows those who practice it to acquire the potential ability to become completely aware of oneself. In this test, or experimental procedure, are conveying all the theoretical data and conclusions of our research in the field of human perception, applied to the study of phenomena external to the planet Earth. The previous procedure, from which this is inspired, aimed to stop the phenomenon of alien abduction. In fact, we had identified a procedure named Dynamic Triade Color Test, which gave good results. The procedure of the simple TCT involved a very complex mental simulation, which was driven by an external operator, who made the abductee mentally simulate a completely dark room, where there were some spheres mimicking some off lamps. These lamps were mentally lit on by the abducted person in a precise order to let them assume the archetypal meaning of the three components of your own deep self: mind, spirit, and soul. Analyzing the colors of the three lamps, one could get a clear psychological picture of the subject and his problems through a simple archetypal mechanism. In this way, the presence of alien interference or psychological problems could be diagnosed. With an abductee subject, the operator made him to correct the colors of the spheres, helping him to achieve the goal of getting the correct archetypal colors, identified on statistical basis as green for the ideal mind, red for spirit, and blue or yellow for soul. For an in-depth study of the ideally correct brain mechanism, read the previous works, and in particular those that relate to the TCT. The subject was asked to detect the presence of other light sources inside his ideic room. This corresponded to a mental image of alien intruders. The subject's mind sees intruders as bright balls of the appropriate colors. In that context, it was possible to identify the active alien memories, the lux, other parasites without body, and all the microimplants that may be present in the body. The soul sphere was encouraged to mentally remove all the intruder objects in the room with an active will. Finally, the connections between the soul and the creator of the dual virtual universe, with the prime man, the corresponding counterpart in the anti-universe, and the figures up in the hierarchy could be severed. Read Genesis 3, the same author. Once the subject was isolated by its manipulators' creators, the operator asked the soul to view, through an ideic scanner, the body of the abductee, verifying the presence of alien and military microimplants, and destroying them one by one, through the active will. Then asked the soul to look for copies of the abductee's body along the spacetime, identifying and eliminating them one by one in the same way. At this stage, the operator asked the abductee to examine the time axis, with the aid of the soul, in order to check the absence of abduction scenes in both the past and the future. The subject was so completely freed from the abduction problem. In some cases, through the awareness of their own soul, they were led through a path we called photo album, where they identified all types of aliens who had come to disturb the abductee's existence. To raise awareness of the past situation to the soul, the aliens were recognized and identified, on a conscious level, to avoid further unaware abduction. Finally, the three spheres were merged into one ball of white or yellow color, symbolizing ideic sum of the red, green, and blue or yellow. The merging of the triad was perceived as the ideic sum of the three frequencies in the visible range of the three colors, and the mind automatically produced the color sum. The results of this procedure, which lasted an average of 2.5 hours, provided the necessary acquisition of knowledge to avoid being subject to more abduction, both by aliens and military, than from the influences of the various cosmic creators. The results, though good, were not optimal yet. Many subjects, after treatment, acquired the ability to defend themselves from the alien, but often, due to prior serious psychotic deficiencies, were unable to maintain this condition throughout their entire existence on this planet. There was therefore the need for further applications of this methodology administered by a more experienced operator. The use of this procedure was leading to a long series of failures, completely determined by the lack of clear willingness of these abductees to break free. In the abductee's psyche, psychotic reactions arose, which led the subject to consider one's life better with the aliens than without. An addition to the old procedure brought to the construction of an eidetic protective bell wrapped around the abductee's mental room. Projecting the aliens outside this bell and asking the Triad to watch over it helped in solving more cases. Unfortunately, we noticed that every time the abductee's self-esteem was in jeopardy, the bell barrier became brittle and open to alien attacks. The new procedure. In the past year, we were able to carry out further experimental observations that led us to identify procedural errors in the old DTCT. These new observations emerged from a study, at a quantum level, of the universe. In particular, the understanding that the universe is not dual led us to conclude that there is no separation. The duality, as we have described in the third part of the trilogy titled Genesis, is a trick of perception of the human mind. The universe is incorrectly seen as a sort of double-faced concept, where the extremes belong to two different categories. Good and evil, on and off, masters and slaves, rich and poor, but also Hermitian linear operators of opposite sign, such as plus and or the unit vectors of space, time and potential energy, or only illusions of perception. In this context, the wave-particle duality was restructured into a new non-dual perspective, linked to the consciousness and not to elusive hidden parameters of modern physics. The assumption that the virtual universe is not dual made us understand that something had tried to have us believe it. We discovered that the duality is a system to categorize mankind, to make us believe in the existence of an opposition of two sides. The dualism was the system by which aliens and alienated tried to force the man to make battles that were not their own. The Latin idea divide et impera worked up until someone noticed the deception. Some observations through a quantum physics point of view allowed us to understand how the duality did not exist except as a form of false perception. We understood that the second law of thermodynamics was to be reviewed. The concept of difference of entropy of the universe should not be related as much as to the energy of the system, but rather to the knowledge of the system and energy combined. The conclusion of all these observations pointed in one direction only. If there is no duality, the universe is not divided into two sub-universes, but it's a single box in which there are many beings with different levels of awareness. This different perception of the universe was mistaken for a dualistic vision of it. The universe is not dual in itself, but becomes dual because it's perceived as such by non-integrated awareness. So, if there were no categorizing barriers, we could not, in DTCT, held a barrier that kept the adductee in a cage built by himself. The cage really could protect somebody, as the existence of the imaginary cage had the intrinsic idea of the chance to bring down its boundaries. If there are no boundaries, it is not possible to bring them down. The adduct was not to defend himself from the aliens with a barrier, and you could not keep soul, mind and spirit separated, although united in a sum of three spheres that could be taken to the original position, restoring the separation between them. There was no separation between the components of the triad, but they were separated in the beginning by those that created the duality. Man's consciousness, that is the creation, cannot be manipulated by anyone. In order to deal with it, one has to separate consciousness into three subconsciousnesses, categorizing them. We actually discovered that soul, mind and spirit exist only in our dual perception, but they are only part of an unique original consciousness. It has all colors, because soul, mind, and spirit are every colors. Since the conscience may be all, its three components no longer exist. When they regain consciousness, they were divided upstream. The sum of soul, mind and spirit could not be a white sphere, because white is the sum of the three frequencies, typical of the manifestation of the triad, but not of a complete integration between them. The white can be reassembled in the three original colors, restoring the separation, and with it, the alien abduction. The total sum of the colors of integrated consciousness in the virtual universe is of all colors, not overlapping but integrating. Such color is the non-color. Ideally, the non-color is perceived by the human mind, like everything and nothing, which, according to the physics of the zero-point energy, have the same meaning. If we think that a point in space is empty, we must ask ourselves if it is empty because there's nothing or is empty because at that point there is everything and the opposite of everything that annihilate each other. And then everything and nothing become the same thing. The transparent sphere is ideally nothing and everything. But the transparent ball does not have any kind of consistency, nothing can hang up to it. The transparent sphere evokes the representation of the ideic quantum wave. The concept of wave and particle is bound to the concept of the unconscious conscious. When consciousness is wave, it is equivalent to unconsciousness. We know that it exists, but no one knows where it is localized in spacetime. In other words, it is invisible because it is everywhere in the same time. On the other hand, the particle is the ideic representation of total awareness. The integrated consciousness knows that it can be both particle and wave, and it can decide. Face the alien as wave means being, in front of the alien, completely transparent and invisible, but, from a quantum point of view, assumes the meaning of rejecting the alien experience, with subsequent absence of interaction. The physical phenomenon thus becomes perceptible only as non-localized wave and as a particle. Being a particle means accepting the experience of interference. This concept can be taught to the ideally integrated consciousness, and that consciousness acquires the knowledge to be able to decide, millions of times a day, in front of the whole universe, to participate in an experience, and face it as particle, or deny the experience and not to be found appearing as wave. Being a wave means that I know you're there, but do not know where and when. In the simplest terms, the integrated consciousness knew how to become invisible to the alien experience. The new experimental part of the dynamic flash triad color test, which lasts no more than 15 minutes, in a single application, makes the merging of the triad irreversible. Teaching to the integrated consciousness the virtual concepts of quantum physics in a way the integrated triad can understand it and makes anyone who carries out this exercise properly integrated with oneself. The procedure is not built to save the man from the alien, but to make sure that the man acquires awareness of their own thoughts. At that stage, if the person who practices the technique was an abductee, one could get rid of the problem once and for all. If the subject has never been abducted, however, will be free from his engagement with the creation of the false gods or demons. The non-local universe and the abduction experience. The FDTCT does not provide the destruction of microchips, does not provide the destruction of copies in research, does not evoke any images of aliens, does not evoke any kind of virtual memory, does not correct the colors of the triad, and so is not traumatic. It is a very light states of hypnosis, easily modifiable, depending on the needs. It should be emphasized that since the universe is not local and there are no past nor future but only the present, the procedure produces an immediate effect on the timeline of the old neuro-linguistic programming. In fact, at the same time in which the three spheres of the triad acquire every color, merge and achieve the perfect transparency, they have not only integrated into a unique essence of consciousness as irreversible but are never separated in the axis of time. The quantum wave functions of past and future collapse in the present, this giving reality only to it. In this context, if the total consciousness is reconstructed, it has never divided before, but if consciousness has never been divided, no one has ever been able to manipulate it. This causes experimentally, in the instant of the fusion, that everything abduction-related disappears, all the memories of the past abductions are gone, all microchips that an abductee has in the body ceases to exist, all copies of the abductee have never been made. The abduction experience remains as done, but it belongs to a changed past that is like never happened. The new procedure also ensures the total free choice of integrated consciousness. The transparent sphere of the IC can decide at any moment to be wave or particle, to be visible or invisible, to interact or to refuse the experience. The new procedure does not provide for the physical elimination of the alien but simply the transformation of the abduction event in wave. In this context, The integrated consciousness becomes invisible to the alien that technically no longer has the ability to interact with the event. The alien is not destroyed, but simply, his probability of interact with the abductee is minimized. The odds of having the alien in front of you become so small that the alien can no longer identifiable. This is the result that, virtually, becomes the refusal by the integrated consciousness of this experience, but in terms of quantum states, it is the result of statistical probability that starts from the assumption that we are the ones who build the virtuality and that we interact with it, but only if we want. Measures are not produced by tools, we produce them by ourselves, as recently demonstrated by some experiments in quantum thermodynamics. It should also be noted that the treatment of quantum events can only be made by microscopic contexts. In fact, both components of the triad and the integrated consciousness are similar in all aspects to the microscopic components of Bohmian quantum physics. There are no failures of the technique. It should be emphasized that each technique has some drawbacks, or at least we know its limits. The FDTCT did not properly have bugs, but this does not mean that the subject will not be taken more if he's an abductee. The subject will be taken again if his integrated conscience wants it. There are many drives that can influence in this direction. An abducted subject that was freed from the problem more than a year ago was abducted again, or better was again in contact with alien species, during a particular night. The next day, some bruising appear on the body of the ex-abductee. The reconstruction of the episode, with the help of the anchors technique, highlighted two important factors. During the night the aliens had entered the house of the subject, he describes them as if they had not seen him. The aliens in fact went straight from the abductee's room and entered his brother's, who was also an abductee. The ex-abductee felt like he had to defend his brother, but at that time unconsciously decides to re-accept the alien interference, returning visible. It took to a real fight with the aliens, whose effects showed the day after. The second thing we noticed was that, in this case, however, the person was not taken by the aliens, because the integrated consciousness cannot be separated, and no one can act on it ever again. Some other cases in which the container was taken seem to be due to the fact that the former abductee decided to take revenge and harbors a deep grudge against the abductor, that are considered those who have ruined one's life. At that moment, the subject unconsciously prepares to take revenge, and therefore he accepts to interact with the alien. The abduction takes place again. This technique can also be applied to people who do not know anything about aliens, who are not aware of their situation, who do not have memories, at a conscious level, of some sort. But after treatment, the integrated consciousness, in these specific cases, decide to recall the experiences useful to the acquisition of self-awareness. In these cases, it seems that the integrated consciousness is brought in plain sight in front of the alien, like to play a game that can even be dangerous, but that does not bring any more to the submission of the transparent ball to the alien. The transparent ball can never be taken. At this stage it is important to integrate the transparent sphere with its container, or the container will be taken, however, but the transparent sphere will not be taken. This fact brings the subject, especially if female, to still be used as a broodmare by the alien. Teaching to the integrated consciousness to integrate with its container is the only way to get rid of this problem. What integrated consciousness is? For integrated consciousness we mean the part of the primordial consciousness that created the virtual universe, which, however, integrated itself into virtuality, having awareness of space, time and energy. It is a consciousness that, as the sum of three components, with also virtual features, knows that it created the universe, knows what space and time and energy mean, talks to the neutral gender, dominates the space, time and energy, has the potential to express in paranormal fashion, uses the container to gain experience. Therefore, since the integrated consciousness must do its experience, it is unaware of everything because, if it had this knowledge, it would not need to be integrated in the virtual universe it has created. The FDTCT experience makes the man integrated, and no longer divided in 4 parts, bringing it back to the original condition, but this does not include the prefixed experience that has yet to be accomplished. When the experience of FDTCT takes place, the map of territory in each of us changes and appears to be subject to the real problems of virtuality that he has decided to face. Often this creates moments of bewilderment that, at the extreme, could lead to the hypothetical decision of the integrated consciousness to revert to the separated state. What's better, the aliens or the difficulties of everyday life? The integrated consciousness that must do the experience has free will and can choose, but the choice to go back is very rare and is not representative of the failure of the technique, but rather it is a clear and successful proof of the existence of free will. In the cases we deal with, in a year's time, no integrated consciousness was taken again. Some containers have had some small annoying problems that tend towards the total resolution. Only one case showed the idea of returning into the alien abduction phenomenon, but to date he has not done so. IC, from a quantum perspective, has 3 vectors of space, time and energy that allow it to express itself in his created virtual reality. On the other hand, the 3 vectors of consciousness are perfectly superimposed, becoming a single vector of awareness. It should be noted that the 3 vectors of consciousness of soul, mind and spirit are not switchable between them. They are placed at 90 degrees to one another and cannot overlap to create a white ball as at the end of classic DTCT. The transparent sphere, once it is reduced to a point in the procedure that we will see below, produces the final superposition of the 3 vectors of consciousness, destroying the schizoid separation between spirit, soul, and mind, that originates an imperfect being, very vulnerable due to the lack of internal consistency. The more obvious characteristics of the integrated consciousness in deep hypnosis are the following. The subject speaks to the male gender. The subject knows he built the universe, but does not know why he did it this way. The subject claims he exists because he acts. The subject says that the dual does not exist, and if you exist is because you act, and to be all, you have to do it all. The subject sees and perceives the universe as totally virtual, as a fake construct, without apparent solidity. The integrated consciousness sees the universe also in a real way. Real and or virtual together. Learns to observe oneself from an infinite number of points that look toward the center, and from the center look towards infinite points. Through the implementation of integrated consciousness you can travel in virtuality taking a vision in any space and time, while slowly emerge aspects of paranormal nature, more and more evident in the everyday life. The technique works on yourself. The classic TCT required, for its complexity and duration, the use of an outside help. The operator was guiding the subject into the mental simulation, making him go through all the necessary steps in order to finally reach the white sphere of consciousness. During the test trial of the new technique, we tried to examine some partial failures and came across the theory of the mirror effect. The universe, according to our conceptions, has holistic nature. That means nothing is separated from the whole, as it is supposed to be, confirming the equations of Bohm's physics. Following this reasoning, the reactions that another person will have dealing with me depend solely on me. If someone argues with me, is because I have not achieved harmony inside myself. In fact, if for example, I walk into a room where there is someone I dislike, that person will perceive, within oneself, my hostility, and any of my gesture will be enough to produce a backlash against me. At that point I will be allowed to react, because technically I did not start the argument, but in reality I had. In this context, the other will turn against me because I, through a local morphogenetic field, communicated my discomfort to him. Another aspect that we noticed was that some subjects had difficulties in some parts of the method that, if not well understood, resulted in problems after the treatment. Some abductees did not understand the quantum effects of wave and particle. The alien abductions did not resume, but these abductees were not able to make themselves invisible to the alien, who still remained passively present in everyday experiences. Other abductees had difficulty separating from the figure of the alien, since the adductee did not understand the idea that the past does not exist and therefore remained bound to it. By a more thorough analysis I've done both on me and on some of my colleagues who practiced DFTCT in the experimental stage, I could see that during the application of test, the word took a deeper significance, but behind the word there is another type of meta-communication, more profound and effective. During the test, the operator produces a situation where he passes a packet of information that migrate from his consciousness to the consciousness of the abductee. If the adductee wants to acquire the information pack, he gets all the information that the operator passes him. In other words, the DFTCT could be even conducted in silence, and the result would probably be the same. But since humans use the word in this virtuality to simplify things, we used words to teach to the consciousness what the quantum physics is. But in this context, if my conscience's information pack has some dissonance, it will be transmitted to the other person. For example, if I have some unresolved issue with my past and lead a DFTCT on an abductee, he will be totally free from the aliens, but perhaps he will continue to see their image next to his bed at night, while trying to sleep. My inability to free myself from my past was redirected to the abductee that cannot handle this part of virtuality, and will suffer my same problem. In other words, if I go to the doctor with a cold, and I want to be healed, I do not have to go to a doctor that contracted a disease, because he will not heal me, having himself the problem. It was clear that this type of meta-information not only acted at the DFTCT level, but constantly in all daily relationships between living beings. It was also clear where in the past we had partially failed. If you're not completely clean, you can compromise your patient, and this could be one of the reasons why some abductees did not get rid of the problem completely, excluding cases in which subject was acting against the resolution. Therefore, in principle, no one can perform a DFTCT on another, unless he's perfect inside. It must be said that there aren't, to my knowledge, perfect people, and should also be emphasized, as all the DFTCTs our group carried out up to now, during the experimentation, had success, although with minor smudging. The best thing to do was to build a simple experimental procedure that everyone could make for oneself, making sure to have a strong active will in wanting to solve their own problems. It is here emphasized that the success rate of DFTCT is closely linked to the understanding of the things you are doing. You cannot perform the test by simply reading the experimental part below, as if it were a ritual of the Catholic Church or any prescription of a doctor, but you must understand what each step means exactly. So, who wants to test this on themselves, must read, study and understand a lot of what I wrote earlier. Must have clear understanding of the 3 works entitled Genesis. They must understand how the mental simulations works and study the operation and theory of classic TCT. Misinterpretation could void the entire procedure on the one hand, but on the other we know that all the important information is already available to all, at the level of the holographic grid, through the morphogenetic field. The subjects to which we practice DFTCT in the experimental stage need to understand that if, after the application of the test, they still had doubts and uncertainties about certain situations affecting their lives, is because the test will integrate, abolishing the duality, allowing the consciousness to live its experience undisturbed, within its container, but the system does not change their chosen path in life, which must be worked out by themselves. In particular, people who have done the DFTCT must not refer more to me or to others for their unresolved issues, but ask directly to their integrated conscience, that will be perfectly able to clarify any aspect of reality. This represents the consciousness that must resolve the unresolved problems. The harmony is the final result to achieve. So ask yourself, the divine part of yourself, and this part will always reply. The disease is only a state due to the misunderstanding of separation, while the healing consists in the acquisition of consciousness. In this context, it is evident how the DFTCT is useful to all human beings, because it helps to integrate with your inner self, and sets free from the chains of false gods and demons that, as the myth says, tried to live forever without living the experience directly, but through the pain experienced by others. The dual universe provides that love and hate are, in fact, two faces of the same coin. Our gods rulers decided to rig the game to outcome always heads and never tails. Doing so, they only live half experience, and so they are only half themselves. We decided to live the full experience, so they manipulated us, attempting to steal the experience they was missing. This theft is only the representation of a lack of consciousness, determined by not understanding that we all are one. So, when you understand this, you also understand how the mirror works. Humans saw in aliens the despicable part of themselves, and the aliens saw their fragility in the humans' fragility. At the moment the duel dies, each of us becomes aware of oneself. And from that moment on you mirror only onto oneself. Inside there is the whole universe with all the answers to all the questions. FDTCT, experimental part. Find a place where no one can disturb you, relax and close your eyes. Go deep into the darkness of your mental room. You are in the middle of this room and everything is dark. You know in your room there are some light bulbs that probably you don't see because usually they are turned off, but they can be already on. If they're not, turn them on one by one. Your three light bulbs are mind, that you turn on first, spirit, that you turn on second, and the soul, that is the third one. Look at this light bulbs that are in your mental room. They're you, your essence. Look at the position, the color, the size, the distance from you, and the height from the ground. The three light bulbs are the only light sources in your room. Maybe you see just a light bulb as the sum of the three light bulbs, but if you see three light bulbs, identify the soul part and put your arm inside it. Listen and perceive which tactile perception you have. What do you perceive inside your soul part? Hot or cold, dense or solid, liquid or gassy? Do you feel any particular smell or any particular sound? Perceive your soul, that it is showing herself to you as a light sphere. In the meanwhile ask her if she remembers when, at the beginning of time, it was joined to the other two spheres, mind and spirit, that, in the instant before the separation still don't exist. Ask your soul to turn back to that point, where soul, mind and spirit are a unique thing and three consciousness don't exist, there's just one consciousness. Slowly, sensations and images about that instant will come to you. Now ask your soul if it wants to go back to that primordial state. Make your soul look at what happens and why did the conscious sphere separate into three subspheres. It is important to achieve awareness about all this. When the soul decides, if it decides, to become whole again, become again an unique thing, no longer separated from mind and spirit, ask it to join to the other two spheres, make it notice that there is no specifical color for soul, mind and spirit, as they are part of a whole, so accurately they can take any color they want. If soul wants to change color, and if mind and spirit want it too, they will notice that they can acquire any colors they want. That's because they're everything and every color represents one thing that it is possible to be. Now we proceed with the fusion of the three lights into one light that initially will have all the colors. A light in which every spot of light will be of a different color. If you look at the sphere from a long distance now, you will see that the sphere is white, but if you get closer to it, you can see that it can acquire all the colors of the universe. At this point, mentally say to the light sphere that it's not enough to add together in this way in order to make the fusion, but it is necessary to melt irreversibly into one thing, a sphere that is just one color, the color that represents all the colors, the transparent color. Once the sphere will become a totally invisible sphere in that instant, the integrated consciousness turns back to be. It has to be said to the integrated consciousness that nothing and everything are the same things, but that nothing can stick to the nothing. If in that instant the sphere becomes transparent, no aliens or other things can disturb it anymore. In that instant it's necessary to make the integrated consciousness sphere notice that there are no barriers anymore within soul, mind and spirit, and those barriers never existed because the past has been modified and no one could ever use the three separated spheres because they never existed, because now they are one thing. Now, that you're still in your mental room, get into the transparent sphere with your body. The sphere is you and you are the sphere. The sphere keeps your body shape and adapts to it, you become the transparent sphere. Barriers don't exist anymore. The walls, the floor, and the ceiling of the room have no reason to be anymore. The integrated consciousness tears down the barriers of the mental room, and now it can look onto the infinite. Wait a few instants and look at the infinite as it appears to you. Contemplate the place where you exist. After a few instants, ask to your transparent sphere to listen to the universe and become the universe yourself. In order to do that, ask your sphere to expand slowly. You expand yourself slowly until you reach the borders of the universe. No need to do it fast, do it slowly. While you're expanding, you touch the universe that you created, till the end of the universe, till the limits. Your transparent sphere did an unique big breath, absorbing all the universe. As a big breath. For an instant, that lasts the eternity, listen to your universe, where you are everything. Achieve awareness of your body because it is like achieving awareness of the entire universe. Then, breath out and contract yourself, becoming small. Make your transparent sphere attached to your body become smaller and smaller, but doing that, bring inside you all the universe that you absorbed, make it become very small, slowly, smaller and smaller, no hurry, till you make it become an infinitesimal spot that has all the universe inside. Feel for a few moments this very particular sensation and now get back to your original size. Now, your integrated consciousness knows that it can breath and become a big wave, a big sphere, or a very little spot. When this wave is big, it is everywhere, and so in any place in particular. In that state, it is completely invisible. When it is a little particle, it is visible and it is ready to interact with everything. Talk to yourself as integrated sphere and explain to your integrated sphere that it can always exist in these two states, and it can show itself as wave or as particle, being invisible or visible, facing any experience of the virtual reality. Remember at the end of all this, that the integrated consciousness uses its container to gain the experience in this virtuality, and it's bad if its container is taken by others, and it is necessary to protect one's own container, because it is like a dress for the integrated consciousness. Listen to yourself for a few instants, as you have never done before, and look at the universe around you. Conclusions. If the exercise is performed without forgetting any parameter of those described, should not be repeated, because the fusion of the spheres in a single ball is irreversible. If the subject will want to lead these kind of experience in the future, he will travel through the universe without needing to figure the transparent sphere external to himself, because he is the transparent sphere. If the ball is opaque and it's seen from the outside, this means that the body has been taken again. We deducted this on the basis of our experimental procedure. It must be emphasized that, in the mental room, at the beginning, you may find less than 3 balls, because they may already be merged into a single transparent sphere, and because some spheres could take the black color and having the mind room darkened, they may not be clearly visible. If this event occurs, merge the ball equally, even though some of them are not visible, and proceed as described above. In the mental room, there may be more than 3 balls, but in this case you'll have to identify the 3 spheres of soul, mind and spirit and work with them, forgetting about the others, that will disappear after the successful merging of the integrated consciousness. Those who wish, may carry the mental simulation on themselves, having carefully studied all the theory that there is behind this application. Some people can be helped by others to follow the path of this mental simulation, but we strongly suggest to make it by yourself. Usually, we believe it is necessary to point out that those who claim not to be able to perform this simulation independently, in most cases, just want to delegate the responsibility of their existence to another person. It would be impossible to help them. To all those who do not understand the kind of approach that we have taken, I suggest, before passing any judgment on it, to do this simple experiment and understand it thoroughly, as it is not possible to talk about something that you do not know. One must never be afraid, because there is nothing in the universe to be afraid of except his own ignorance. Have a nice journey.